Welcome back. You're watching Talk to Al Jazeera with the U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security, Michael Chertoff. Thanks very much for joining us. We talked a lot in part one about the situation with U.S. residents and citizens. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about non-U.S. citizens and residents. Do you think it's time to close down Guantanamo Bay?
I think a number of people have said it would be great if you could close down Guantanamo Bay, although I think the International Committee, the Red Cross, has been there over the last years, and I don't think they've registered any particular complaint.
But what do you think? What's your personal
I think the
opinion?
question is, you got to decide, what are you going to do with the people there? As many people as could be returned to their home country, I think that would be great, as long as we could be confident that they're not going to return to the battlefield. You know, recently we saw somebody return to the Gulf and they wound up blowing themselves up in a suicide bombing in Iraq. That's plainly not a good outcome. With respect to those who are not going to be retained and returned and who are going to have to be ultimately brought to justice, the real question is, where do you house them while they're going through that process? It won't surprise you to learn there aren't very many communities that raise their hands and say, we'd love to have one of the world notorious terrorists housed in a prison in our community. So I think the problem has really been, where do you place these people while you're adjudicating their cases?
But with all due respect, you're not answering my question. Is it time to end Guantanamo Bay as an institution that keeps people outside of the normal conventions of law as POWs? They've been held for years without charge. And in fact, there's only been one conviction so far, David Hicks, as you know, who was convicted as part of a deal he cut just to get out of Guantanamo Bay. And in fact, he's a free man today.
Well, I'm going to disagree with the premise that somehow the place Guantanamo Bay means you're being held outside of the legal system.
The normal norms.
Right,
That's, everybody agrees it's outside of the normal norms of the Geneva Conventions.
Well, let me separate a whole bunch of different things out. Wherever you hold somebody, whether it's Guantanamo Bay or downtown Chicago or here in Doha, the question is going to be, what are the legal rules that apply? When someone's charged in a civil system, it's going to be one set of rules. When they're charged or held under military law, it's going to be a different set of rules. And people who are captured on the battlefield are held under a system of rules where first someone has to determine whether they're lawfully being held, are they really a threat, and then ultimately, if they've committed a war crime, they get a trial in a military commission or a military tribunal. All those things have to progress, meaning that everybody who's being held has to be have their status reviewed, determine whether they really are a threat, and if necessary, they should be presented to a military commission. Whether that takes place in Guantanamo or someplace else is really a question of what is the most convenient place to hold people while they are getting this legal process, which everybody agrees they ought to get.
With all due respect, why did the U.S. then transfer them to Guantanamo Bay? I mean, the whole point was to evade questions of the sorts of rights that they might enjoy were they held in the U.S. mainland. Everybody knows that.
I think the reason they weren't brought to the U.S. mainland is because it would be dangerous for any community to hold a large number of terrorists in a prison where they might become a focal point for acts of terrorism, which were either attempting to free them or attempting to punish a community which housed them.
You have to take into account people's rights. I mean, you use the word terrorist there, but only one conviction. There are still, I think, 254 people being held not only without convictions, but without even a trial. It's been years.
But I think, again, Sammy, you're confusing two things. I agree with you. People need to have their status reviewed by a tribunal, and if they're going to be charged, they need to have a trial in front of a military commission. Where that takes place shouldn't affect the question of what the rights are. I think whether that takes place in Guantanamo or here in Doha or any place else in the world, you're still going to have to address the question of what the legal rights are. Everybody's getting into court, and these issues are being raised in courts, and the courts are either saying,
but everybody
you're doing enough or you're not doing enough.
There have been years, 254 people are still without charge, let alone court dates or trials.
Well, some people have been charged, and of course you've read in the paper that a number of the highest, I guess most dangerous terrorists have been charged. Again, as is customary with the law of war, when people are captured on the battlefield, they may not be charged. During the duration of the war, they may be held. As long as you can determine they are combatants, that they have in fact taken the field of battle, you don't have to release them.
Do you think that any mistakes have been made in the war against terror, in the measures being adopted, the process in Guantanamo Bay, reports of waterboarding, reports of borderline torture?
Sure, there's no question mistakes are made. Mistakes have been made in
Like what?
Mistakes have been made in every war in existence. It would have been nice to get some of these tribunals and commissions moving much more quickly. It has been a long time. If we could have done some of this legal process, you know, a couple of years ago, that would have made things a lot better. So
what about the interrogation techniques?
Again,
reports of FBI memos describing them as borderline torture. Are you comfortable as a legal man with that?
You know, when I get reports, vague reports, it's hard to comment. But again, that's an illustration of my point. The Inspector General of the Department of Justice reviewed this entire issue. At the end of the day, actually found the FBI had behaved appropriately, had not participated in anything that was inappropriate.
How long does the war on terror go on for? How do you know when your job is done?
Well, I can tell you, as long as they're trying to detonate bombs over the Atlantic Ocean, as long as they're trying to blow up buildings in Germany, I mean, if you look at all the things that have happened in the last several years that continue to happen, this war is still going on. This is, you know, the ideologues who have launched this war, they started it. Now, they haven't yet evaporated. We don't have the luxury or the freedom to walk away from a fight when the people who are waging the war are continuing to bring the fight to us. The threat is out there for the whole world to see. I mean, you know...
There are threats all over the world, Secretary Chertoff, and very few, if any, countries have resorted to the sort of measures which the US has.
I actually have to disagree with you. I think what we've done is actually quite similar to what a number of countries are doing. I mean, there are countries, for example, in Western Europe, which can detain people for an extended period of time.
But no one's gone as far as stripping residents or attempting to strip residents and citizens of constitutional rights, detention, unlimited detention, or classifying POWs as a new term that denies them the Geneva Convention status.
But if we go through you know, each of these things individually instead of lumping them together. On the issue of detention, there are countries in Western Europe where you can detain somebody for months and months at a time based on the say-so of an investigating magistrate, essentially a prosecutor. They're debating now in Britain the amount of time someone can be detained in the civilian domain, extending it. All these countries are struggling with how do you find a system.
They're debating a time period, but no one has gone for unlimited detention.
But here again, no one has argued unlimited, unreviewable detention. What has been argued for here is a system where, when people are caught on the battlefield, they can be detained with a process of review, including the opportunity to go to courts, which is the whole reason we're debating this is because these people are going to court. The reason there are cases in the Supreme Court is because people have brought them there. So your premise, which is that this is all taking place in the shadows, is actually undercut by the very cases which you are relying upon to make your argument, namely all these cases which are challenging and raising questions about the process. And at the end of this, the Supreme Court's going to decide what the Constitution requires and what it doesn't require, and that's as it should be. That's the way our process works. The judiciary has the final say on what the law requires.
As you know, Al Jazeera's cameraman, Sami al-Hajj, was held for years in Guantanamo Bay, released without trial or charge. Does the U.S. owe him any compensation?
I have to say, I have no knowledge about this case. I've never heard about it, so I can't possibly speculate about it.
You've never heard of Sami al-Hajj?
No, it's not. It's not. And I also want to remind you, I don't actually, or my department doesn't cover this issue, so there's no professional reason I would have had to be involved in it.
Secretary Chertoff, I would fire my aides if I was you in coming to Al Jazeera and them not informing you of the cameraman and journalist who was held.
You know, I mean, it's not an issue, and even if it were an issue in my department, it'd be very hard to talk about an individual case.
Let's talk in general then. Someone who's held in Guantanamo Bay for years without trial, without charge. Does the U.S. even owe him an apology?
You know, to ask a general question without specifics of the facts, it's almost impossible to answer. There are cases in the regular criminal justice system, which we see all the time. They're always unfortunate cases where someone winds up being convicted and it turns out it was a wrongful conviction. We see some of this with DNA. It's a very small fraction of people. So the question arises, should you apologize? Sure. Anytime someone is mistakenly or wrongly held, it's a tragedy. It's nothing anybody wants to do on purpose.
So do you think it's a shame for the U.S. justice system and for the name of the U.S. that no one has ever received an apology, compensation for the years that they've been held
putting to one side compensation, which is a different issue, because even when people are wrongly convicted, we don't compensate them for that. An apology and an expression of regret is owed if something has been done that's wrong. But you have to evaluate the individual facts and circumstances. I would be very surprised if, in a case where someone was truly held, who was innocent and it was a mistake, that there wasn't an expression of regret or a feeling of regret about it. There's no purpose in doing that.
Just a final point here. I asked you earlier about Guantanamo Bay. Should it be closed down? I didn't feel you really answered my question. What do you believe?
What I believe is this. I would love to find a way to return most of the members, most people in Guantanamo Bay to their home countries, to face justice and also to make sure that they're.
So you would like it to close it down?
You know, Sammy, in many ways it would be great to close it down. I don't think, however, that really addresses the issue you're raising, because whether you keep people in Guantanamo Bay or you move them somewhere else, you still confront this issue, that we're dealing with a war and a struggle that is unlike one we've ever faced before. And I think what we have to balance is this. We want to give people a fair process. It may not be the process you get in the ordinary law enforcement context, because you're dealing with people who are caught in Afghanistan. You're not going to have your forensic crime team out there gathering evidence like they do on television shows. So you need to give people their rights. But you also have to make sure you don't have occurrences like, as I said, we saw recently, where people are being released so they can pick up a bomb and a gun again and try to take a second try at killing Americans or killing Europeans or killing innocent people in the Middle East. I guess the point I'd leave you with is this. The people who are executing this ideology of bin Laden and everybody else are killing innocent people around the world. Months ago, Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb blew up a school bus with Muslim school children. I don't see any possible justification for that. And as long as there are people who are out there willing to do that, we've got a balanced need to give them fairness and the rule of law, but also to make sure that we are not hobbling ourselves so that they get 2 or 3 or 4 attempts to kill innocent school children. And that's a very tough issue which we're struggling with.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. We've run out of time. Secretary Michael Chertoff, thank you very much for talking to Al Jazeera.
Pleasure.